Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session entitled COP28, High Stakes and Little Time to Deliver on Climate Action. My name is Tamsin. I'm your moderator for the session. I'm a partner at Brunswick Group in London. To set the context, we are way off track when it comes to meeting the Paris Agreement goals. The Global Stocktake, which is the world's most comprehensive evaluation so far of progress made, says that we are really lagging behind, as you all know. The Global Stocktake wants urgent, system-wide transformation across all sectors and contexts in order to get back on track. And we've clearly had a summer of fire, flood and drought, and these escalating weather events serve as a constant reminder of the state of the planet and of the impact on people the world over. The good news is that we know the solutions. Exponential change is happening, and that is proof that transformation can really happen. The executive director of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, recently declared that we are at the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. And the reason he was able to make that declaration is because their forecasts of peak demand for oil, coal and gas are coming sooner than anticipated by the end of 2030. If you look at renewables and electric vehicles, that's where you're really seeing exponential change. And again, a couple more stats on that, on electric vehicles. Remarkably, by 2030, we can expect to have 2/3 of car sales being electric. When it comes to renewables, by 2030, wind and solar are going to make up 40% of global electricity supply, which is just a remarkable exponential change. We are, of course, just a couple of weeks off COP28, and this is an opportunity for world leaders to come together and chart a different future for our planet. It's a time to pick up the pace and to make systematic, course-correcting actions to get us back on track for the Paris Agreement goals. Of course, this COP28 comes at a very difficult backdrop. We have got economic stresses, we have mounting geopolitical tensions, to say the least. And we also have increasingly polarised views about the right way forward on climate change. I'm absolutely delighted to have with me a fantastic panel of speakers to discuss the question, really, of what can we expect from COP28 and what does success look like? Joining me are on what is a really distinguished panel, a senior diplomat from Ecuador, a French energy company leader, a Colombian youth activist, and a celebrated Chinese activist and environmentalist. Please do let me introduce them by name and title. To my left, we have Francisco Javier Vera Manzanares, the first youth advocate for environmental and climate action for Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome. Claire Way-Sand is Executive Vice President of Engie, a French multinational giant in low-carbon energy and services. Marjan is applause, please. Marjan is founding director of the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs in China. And last, but very far from least, is Maria Fernanda Espinosa, who is Executive Director of GWL Voices. GWL stands for Global Women Leaders. And she's formerly President of the UN General Assembly. And most crucially for our panel today, she's actually an advisor to COP28. In terms of running order, we will have our panel discussion and there will be plenty of time for Q&A. So please, as you listen, do store up some tricky, challenging questions and get ready to pose them. With that, I'd really like to dive in. Ms. Espinosa, I think there's probably fewer people better placed than you are to tell us sort of how ambitious can we be about this upcoming COP28? What are your hopes? Succinctly and in a nutshell, what are you driving towards as you advise?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tamsin. And I want to share a personal story. I was at pre-COP in Abu Dhabi a few days ago only. And when I arrived there, I have to confess, I said, perhaps we need to postpone this COP because things weren't looking right. And when I mentioned this and I shared that idea, everybody said, no, we need to keep our hope in our optimism high. And when the pre-COP finished, I completely changed my mind. Sometimes at COPs, and I've been attending COPs for the past 20 plus years, I have to say that at least women, we can feel the energy, we can feel if things are going well or not. And what I felt in Abu Dhabi is that there was a positive energy, high commitment, political will. All these are ingredients for a successful COP. So I would say, in a nutshell, I want to keep a cautious optimism of what we are going to see in the coming weeks and during COP. And if you ask me, I would just mention 4 issues. First of all, we need an ambitious and balanced mitigation outcome, especially looking at the latest IPCC report and the report on the Global Stocktake, which basically is a midpoint to assess progress in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we really need to get our act together in terms of mitigation, to raise the ambition on our NDCs as a nice bridge to what is going to happen during COP30 in Brazil, where we will assess for the first time our NDCs, nationally determined contributions. And however, we see that it's really not an easy path. There are some very complicated issues that are still pending, such addressing the equity considerations on the global stocktake, either decision or declaration, in ensuring that there is coherence between the ambition but also the means of implementation. This is critical for developing countries. Means of implementation for the non-COP nerds, basically it's money, technology, and capacity. The number 2 is a bold and clear, I would say, disruptive climate finance package. The resources that are allocated. And for that, we still have hopes that we will reach the 100 million target for the Green Climate Fund. And we know that it's symbolic because the real money that we need to implement the full Paris, the Paris Agreement is around 2.4 trillion. We know that the Green Climate Fund and the 100 million is about, 7% of the overall climate finance. So we need a strong package. Basically, there is a high-level expert group working on a new framework on climate finance in new numbers and figures on how much money we need to deliver on the Paris Agreement and beyond. We need to have the loss and damage fund fully operational, and there are very good news on that front. Again, there was agreement on how to make the loss and damage fund operational. These were the positive news of the pre-COP, And on this disruptive finance package, I really welcome the announcement of President Macron to establish a working group on global taxation. So it's not just the money, it is a package of measures, including global taxation, including debt relief mechanisms, including reform to the international financial architecture. The number 3 is the new global goal on adaptation. And there is a lot of work and effort put into that. We really hope to see a strong outcome, at least in principles and criteria, to measure efforts that countries, especially in the so-called Global South do to adapt and build resilience regarding climate change. And basically the number 4, which is, I think, perhaps the most important, is to restore trust in negotiations, in the very mechanism of Conference of the Parties, in good diplomacy, negotiation not as a win or lose, as a zero-sum game, but truly a responsible approach to what needs to be done in terms of thinking about future generations, the common good, and economies that are climate and future-proof. So I would see these 4 elements would be, you know, an indication of a successful COP.
I think a lot of our audience might like to know, digging deeper into the mitigation, the first mitigation point, and quick answer to this, if you would, because we want to hear from the other panelists, of course. How optimistic are you that COP28 is going to get to a satisfactory statement on fossil fuel phase-out?
Well, I think this is one of the most critical issues. A just and fair transition, not only on our energy matrices, it's a just and fair social transitions because of everything that, you know, a proper energy transition implies. We are really looking forward to a big surprise, a big positive news in terms of the responsibility of the oil and gas companies to decrease emissions in a big way. And I think the best way to do that is precisely having a COP at the UAE, which I have seen, you know, have a strong commitment towards that end. So let's hope that we will have a positive surprise at COP on that front. So reducing emissions, we know where emissions come from, not only in the fossil fuel area, but also in agriculture, in methane, in all the high-emitting industries such as cement, aluminium, and all the rest that we know. But of course, here, you know, the center of gravity and the attention would be a strong and bold decision on fossil fuels.
Thank you so much. My next question goes to Francisco, if I may. Could you outline for us what are your key recommendations for COP28? And everyone may wish to put their headsets on, if not Spanish speakers at this point.
Exactly. Thank you for mentioning that. So I wait to you while you put your headphones in Spanish. Bueno, para comenzar.
Thank you very much. So if I can get started now, thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for giving me the space to speak to you.
En líneas generales,
if we think in general terms, these recommendations and the clauses that have come out of the COP28 are important. I think that above all, we need to include youth. Why? Because it is clear that the fight against climate change is something that is all of us. You cannot leave anyone behind. You cannot leave any voice unheard. This is important. None of these conditions, if we want to implement all of these different objectives, if we want to work together, we need to include children, youth, such as myself. And we're talking about simple things, simple but concrete things. I'm not talking about reinventing the wheel here. I'm not talking about abstract concepts. I'm not thinking about things that we can't make tangible. I'm talking about simple things to begin with. Let's recognize that children are also suffering because of climate change, the climate crisis. The climate crisis is linked to rights of the child. This has been shown several times. We saw that the Committee on the Rights of the Child participated and gave 26 comments with regards to how climate change is specifically having an impact on children. And when we think about climate change, people tend to lose sight of children. We think about drinking water, right to education, right to non-discrimination. But obviously, when we think about all of these, this is part and parcel of the rights of the child. Climate change is a huge destabilizer of everyone and also of human rights, guaranteeing and allowing access to human rights. And we think about the key decisions that will come out of COP28 in terms of my recommendations. I am going to represent UNICEF, and I want to give a voice to children, which will allow them to recognize the disproportionate impact of climate change on children. We're talking about health, but also I think it's 80%, it's more than 80% of maladies and of illnesses are linked to climate change. We are suffering, we are being impacted. Children and minorities are being impacted. We're talking about lives, people who are living in these with physiological or biological impacts. I also want to talk about the role of children. We need to include children. We need to give them a voice. We can be thinking about how to recognize the fact that we are victims. We are victims as well. I understand that, but we can also be agents of change. Children can be agents of change if you let us do so. You need to listen to us. You need to give us a voice. You need to. We want to be part of the solution. We are young, but we do, and we can have things that could be interesting to say. We could do something for climate. Why? Because it's not just for climate. We're talking about our rights, for our future, and for the millions of children who are having to be displaced, who are having to migrate, who are having their rights completely trampled on. We are impacted by climate change. Therefore, this would be my recommendation for the COP28. And this is also a recommendation that is very ambitious. Ambition is a key word. This is an adjective, but this is a key word, a fundamental word. But we need to think about how we can translate ambition into real action. All of the different agreements, including compromising all the different objectives, rather, of the different pledges for the Paris Agreement, we need to ensure that we're being listened to. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that really inspiring exposition, Francisco. Can you give us, building on that, when you say real action, what real actions do you want out of COP28? Can you just quickly run through them? Maybe it's the top 3, top 4.
Sí, bueno, pues ¿qué acción es real? Yo siento que para la COP28 yo siento que por una parte una acción real,
for COP28 I would like to suggest a few concrete actions.
Una medida que se puede medir, valga la redundancia, de manera cuantificable es la inversión que hay en los niños, precisamente.
We could consider in assessing investing in children. In June in Paris this year, there was a summit on global warming and its impact, and we presented a report to the UNESCO where we say that less than 2.4% of any investment and funding for climate change is dedicated to helping children. So I think that this is something that we should change. Children are impacted. We are not a minority. So this is why we should be included when considering various funding options. We should think about children when we fund water systems, when we talk about water security. Children are facing a whole array of diseases and illnesses. When it comes to food as well, climate change is having an impact, and this is included in the report. When there is an extreme weather event, which is enhanced by greenhouse gases, this can lead to malnutrition and violence. So this is why we must invest on children. We should adapt our water systems and the way we access the water resources and make sure that children's rights are respected. And this was recognized last year by the UN General Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Coming to Claire, from the point of view of ENGIE, what are you looking for to come out of COP28 from the corporate perspective?
Thank you, Tamzin, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I must say a bit of a different role as a representative of the corporate sector. The corporate sector is not around the table of the COP28. So we're not part of the negotiation. However, we are looking at COP28. We will be participating, and we have, as was said by the two previous speakers, we have a lot of ambitions for COP28. Why do we have ambition? Because we have no choice. As you said, Tamzin, we are currently not on the right path in the decrease of global house green gases emissions. So we badly need to accelerate. When you think of the pace of reduction, well, look at Europe, for instance. We are relatively advanced in starting the reduction. However, we need to multiply by 4 the decrease in CO2 emissions in the next few years. And the change, the acceleration has to be even more dramatic for the rest of the world. So we have no choice. We have to make sure that this COP28 is a success. What does it mean? I'm not going to go into the details of the negotiations because that's not where we are. But when we look at what the world needs to achieve its energy transition and to achieve it in an affordable way, and indeed to have a fair transition, we know what are the ingredients. The first one is energy efficiency and sobriety. We will not achieve energy transition if we're not serious about it. We need to change the ways we are producing, change the ways we are consuming. That's the first ingredient. The second ingredient is that we are going to have to green all sources of energies. And here we need in particular to accelerate all the sources of renewable energies. There's currently a pledge at COP28 to multiply by 3 the quantity of renewable electricity between now and 2030. As a company, we're part of this pledge. And that's indeed where we put our money. We're currently, just a few words to say that we as a company are on a trajectory that's certified well below 2 degrees, and we put more than 75% of our growth investment into exactly this, renewables and transition-aligned investment. So we need to put, what the corporate sector needs to do, and that's why we are together in this, is indeed put its money where the actions need to be. So we will need to accelerate, and we need, out of this COP, a clear message to accelerate in electric renewables. We also need a clear message to accelerate in other sources of renewable, not only electricity. Why? Because electricity is not going to do everything. We need renewable heat. We need renewable gases. There are a number of sectors which are not going to be electrified. The so-called hard-to-abate sector. Some industrial sectors, and you were mentioning a few, some heavy mobility sectors, they will need green ways of functioning tomorrow. And these green ways of functioning will be, in particular, green gases, be it biomethane or be it green hydrogen. So we need a very clear message from the COP on two sides. Energy efficiency and sobriety, that's one, and acceleration of renewables, both electric renewables and gas renewables, as a second one. And we know that with these two ingredients, we will be able to achieve energy transition. If we don't, if we have only one or only partially one, we won't be able to achieve this transition.
Claire, what about the fossil fuel side of things? So I think that quite a few observers of COP28 might consider it a disappointment if we only get messages on energy efficiency and acceleration of renewables. Do you personally, and as a representative of ENGIE, do you think that we also definitely need to see that fossil fuel phase-out statement?
Well, it's clear that we will be in a world where the fossil fuel uses will have to decrease. That's a clear reality underpinning the energy transition. The way they're going to decrease is several-fold. Energy efficiency and sobriety will participate to this decrease. The fact that we are able to offer alternatives will also be key. You were mentioning electric vehicles. Well, they are a key alternative to fossil fuel field vehicles. So we need innovation, we need progress, we need to widespread energy solutions that are not dependent on fossil fuel. And we will need to accelerate green gases because for a number of uses, the supply of green gases will be key in the speed of reduction of the use of fossil fuel. So that's really part of the equation. And then, of course, at the end of the day, there will be some carbon capture as well, and that will be part of the equation. But the bulk of energy transition has to rely on energy efficiency, sobriety, and replacing fossil fuels by greener fuels.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ma, would you tell us about the work that your institute does? So I know that you take a very data-driven approach to monitoring companies' supply chains and environmental data across China. Do tell us just how that works, and also, do you see any reasons for optimism given that data-driven approach as we move towards COP28?
Thank you, Tamsin. It's such an honor to join the Paris Peace Forum. I come from China, and as the largest current greenhouse gas emitter, and as a country that suffered from increasing extreme weather events caused by climate change, China is taking climate challenges in a serious way. And but with 1.4 billion people, and with our urbanization and industrialization still going on, how could we bring down the 12 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide and then try to neutralize the rest of it over the next several decades? That's a tremendous challenge to us. But still, I believe there's a chance for us to succeed, because I do see the power of transparency that really help us to achieve amazing emission reduction over the past 10 years. Our organization, IPE, was set up in the year 2006 to try to address air, water, and soil pollution. At that time, exposed hundreds of millions to health hazards. And I believe that issues of such a magnitude gotta be resolved, can only be resolved through extensive participation from the people, from the whole society. But people need to access information. So we built the Blue Map for Zero Carbon, Blue Map database, and the first public interest environmental database to provide people access not just to the monitoring data of the air, water quality, but all the monitoring of the emission sources. At the beginning, not much data available. But through all these efforts, of the last 10 years, we have seen a historic progress made in our environmental transparency. And today, that transparency allows an NGO like us to track the performance of 14 million companies operating in China and color code them And many of the major brands, you consume their products day in, day out. When they before they sign contract in China with their suppliers, they compare their list with our list. And many others, the financial institutions tap into our data. We help them to run through 1 million companies who want to borrow money. And this is an integral part of China's efforts to try to deal with our air and water pollution. And through these efforts, our local emission really comes down. Sulfur comes down from 22 million 10 years ago to less than 3 million last year, 3 million tons. Nitrogen also cut by half. And our air quality, air pollution across China have been reduced by more than half. And Beijing's PM 2.5 dropped from 90 micrograms, as the capital, used to be the capital of smog in China, comes down from 90 micrograms to 30 last year. And when Francisco talked, I was touched, because at that time, as a parent, just like millions of other parents, I worried about my children exposed to that level of smog. Today it's dropping, but still, the WHO standards is 5. So our mission is not accomplished. The next step, if we try to do it, we got to transform our energy mix, our industrial structure, and transportation. All of this can only happen in synergy with our climate action. So we decided to expand our database to cover carbon, blue map for zero carbon, provide people access not just on the national level, but province by province, city by city. 3 of our provinces total emission is larger than that of the Europe, and 6 equals the US total emission. So it's important. And based on that, create accountability by developing all this index to assess the performance, climate performance of provinces and cities in China, along with our partners. And on the corporate side, as Claire mentioned, it's very important. Corporate account for, industrial carbon emission account for 68% of carbon emission in China. So we need to create, data infrastructure, to motivate them to measure and disclose. And based on that, we assess the performance through our index. More than 2,000 major global and local brands and listed companies. And we can see that many of them made net zero commitment and other commitment. But in the meantime, few of them can really touch upon the bulk of their emission, that is along their supply chain, the scope 3. China as the factory of the world have taken much of that. So we developed digital solutions like digital accounting, platform target setting, and product level carbon footprint measuring and disclosure. So I just want to say that, yes, there are daunting challenges, but there are also source of hope. If we can work together, there are ways for us to hasten the process.
Now, Ms. Espinosa has told me that she's really here to motivate governments to up their game in terms of meeting the Paris goals. When it comes to China, obviously so many priorities at the moment. There's a property crisis, there's decoupling, there's a lot of issues to grapple with. How central is the climate? Is the state of the climate in the government's priorities? And we obviously saw the very welcome announcement on methane reduction, and also the high-level meeting with John Kerry and Mr. Zhenhua. Do tell us, how is China heading into COP28?
Yeah, that's another source of hope. That another news that gives us hope, because China made our carbon peak and neutrality commitment at 2020, and that at the beginning, many kind of expect the transition to be easier, but then when we spent so much efforts to try to develop renewable, but suddenly during the summertime, 1 year after another, we encountered this power shortage and sometimes close to power outage in certain regions, and that have raised alarms. And then the turbulent global market, particularly the rising geopolitical tension, have made energy security the top priority. So many of the coal mines that got shut down during our clean air action plan have to be reopened. Some of the new coal power plants have to be reauthorized, because, as a way to try to ensure the secure, to secure our energy supply. So we are facing that very big challenge. Having said that, China has never given up this carbon peak and neutrality target. And I just want you to know that, through our assessment in the, province by province, we can see China's 2030 renewable target got to be shattered by 2025. That target will be achieved by then, and our, our e-vehicles target has been surpassed last year, 2025 target, and this year it's coming close to nearly 30%, the penetration rate. Every 10 cars, 3 of them, sold our e-vehicles, and in the meantime, our renewable target, particularly the solar panel, the solar PV target, we are on our way to try to launch a new initiative to try to install and increase our installation of solar panel to 1 kilowatts per capita. That means 1,400 gigawatts by 2030. I hope, so far it's just about 0.2. So 5 times. China's on its way to try to achieve that. Last year, nearly 50% year-on-year growth. This year, another 50% year-on-year growth. So I think, all of this, I hope, can give the rest of the world can make the rest of the world see that China's actually walked the walk on this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Before going into some Q&A, and I do hope you've got some good questions, I'd like to come back to the question of fossil fuels. Question for you, Ms. Espinosa. Do you think that the so-called abatement, carbon capture and storage technology, which isn't really commercially up and running yet, is abatement, as I believe many people suspect, is it a little bit of an excuse? And will you be happy if you see, a sort of a phase out of fossil fuels, but with lots and lots of abatement in there?
Well, I think I always ask myself, why is it, that climate has become the microcosm of everything that is negotiated and decided elsewhere? I'm thinking, you mentioned very well that it is not only about climate, it is about the so-called triple planetary crisis, air pollution, biodiversity loss, the extinction crisis. And it all comes to understanding that all of these are symptoms of a dysfunctional relationship between our economic models, our development models, and nature. Nature has limits, has its boundaries. And basically, negotiating climate is negotiating lifestyles. And I think the challenge for countries like my own, oil-producing countries, more than 40% of our GDP comes from oil exports in Ecuador, is how to decouple development from emissions in a way. This is not an easy issue to do, as we heard in the case of China. China had to reopen coal plants, but China was not alone. It happened in Europe. It happened in many parts of the world. And when you say, these are pretexts, well, I think that we have, innovation and technologies for carbon removal and in other alternatives that are out there, not only renewable energies, the green hydrogen, in terms of, and everything is about scale, about cost, about access, every solution. So the issue of climate is not like one single easy solution. the climate crisis is human-made. Therefore, the solution has to be human-made. And for that to happen, I agree, the sense of urgency, the acceleration of action, the issue of transparency and accountability on all fronts, I think it's highly necessary. Above all, I think that this negotiation is about our future. Francisco was so clear when he said, we are basically discussing and negotiating lifestyles and the future. And the future not of tomorrow, the future of today, because we are feeling already not only small island developing states or countries in the so-called global south, but the entire world is facing, the huge damage of climate-related disasters. Very, I would say, moderate numbers speak about forced displacement of close to 2 billion people by 2030 because of climate reasons. Among the 30-plus conflicts that are happening today as we speak, most of them are directly or indirectly connected to the climate crisis. So it is about negotiating lifestyles, the right to development, how to decouple development from emissions, low carbon, development pathways, together with intensive inequality, for example, inequality models of development. And that's why, the question, coming back to the beginning, we ask, we have the technologies, we have the knowledge, we have the money, even though it doesn't go where it needs to go. It goes to fossil fuel subsidies, $7 trillion annually in fossil fuel subsidies. So the resources are out there. The technology is out there. The knowledge is out there. Why is it that we cannot act? We cannot, reverse climate change. It is because it's an issue of power. It is an issue of lifestyles. It is an issue of the current geopolitics, but I think that there is an antidote to that. I'm a strong believer that collective action, concerted action, the multilateral mechanisms that are in place, including COPs, by the way, are the way forward. Individual pledges like the methane pledge and the multiplying by 3 renewables pledge are critically important, but they need accountability mechanisms, but they need transparency mechanisms. This is extremely important, and that goes beyond the very negotiation of the climate outcomes. And at the end of the day, I think that we cannot afford the luxury of pessimism. We have to continue to engage, to keep our expectations high. Wherever we sit, we have a responsibility as a government, as civil society, as activists like Francisco. When I think that I didn't sleep for 2 weeks in Paris when we were about to sign the Paris Agreement. And I said, all this energy, intellect that we all put into this, it's worthwhile. Why? Because now we hear people like Francisco speaking up for their rights, speaking up, for the wisdom and the understanding that younger generations have on this very critical and survival issue.
I want to pick up on the mention you made of fossil fuel subsidies and put that to Francisco, if I may. As you said, the IMF has shown us that fossil fuel subsidies were $7 trillion in 2022. That's 7% of global GDP, and 18% of them are explicit subsidies. Not just sort of underpricing global warming. I mean, Francisco, and speaking for youth activists and those passionately concerned with stopping global warming, how does it make you feel that we have these fossil fuel subsidies in the world?
Bueno, I again invite you to use your headphones. Bueno, yo creo que en una gran parte, no solo los jóvenes, sino también
to a good extent, not only young people, but also adults and a good part of society. When you see those inconsistencies, they have to do something. We should not only think about things, but also act according to our ideas. In terms of fossil fuel, we do exactly the contrary. You're helping those companies mine fossil fuels, and it does represent a big part of investment. So there is a lot of despair, a lot of pessimism, negative vision, and a lot of people have talked about eco-anxiety in young people, but also in adults, those people who are afraid about the climate. And I don't think this is an insignificant phenomenon. Of course, climate change is the main threat to humanity at the present time. It is not just a crisis that will go by just because we've had too much greenhouse emissions. It is a crisis, I would say, how can I say, of a non-future, a no-future crisis. And I totally agree with you. You've talked about a planetary, a global 9 planetary limits were established in 2009. We've already exceeded 6 that are decisive for the survival of a very planet system. So it's not only a climate crisis, it's a global crisis that is here to stay. And on top of that, we see the loss of biodiversity and wars. Wars are a very difficult thing. We have wars in several countries, and at the moment we have the highest level in violence in the world since 45. 75 years ago, we were drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Following the suffering of the Second World War, following the huge suffering that nations endured, following the ignorance of some human beings. And 75 later, visibly, you have learned nothing. Look at Gaza, look at Yemen, look at Sudan. More than 50 armed conflicts are raging now in the world. So, of course, how can you not be desperate? Pandemics, poverty, all of those problems and challenges have a common feature, which is that they do represent a threat to life. They put death at the center. All of them, inequalities, climate change. We have to ask for a biocentric society that puts life at the center and not death. Of course, those notions may look abstract, but we do have to carry out climatic actions. We have to reach peace as quickly as possible. We have to guarantee a minimum of respect for human rights and the respect of nature for everybody. Here again, as was said, we have to change lifestyles. We have to change our lifestyles. It is possible to do all this if we have the will to do it. It's not enough to talk about it. Of course, it's all very nice to condemn war, climate change, when you're here in nice cities like Paris. But while it is good to condemn, you have to act. And if you remain in inaction, despair will remain. That's why we have to build, as I said, a biocentric company with eco-hope. That is my notion today, an eco-hope that must be based on concrete actions. And that is where our hope is. We have hope in the fact that humanity still has one chance of moving forward. Of course, in order to grow, we want to grow not only from the economic point of view, but we need to have a growth in value we give to life. So we have to take advantage of this opportunity to demonstrate our concrete commitments through our collective will. An eco hope that is based on action. Thank you.
I'd like to invite questions. There's an incredible array of expertise and speakers here. So, do put your hand up, and I believe that someone will bring you, one of the very helpful coordinators will bring a mic. This gentleman.
This question is for Ms. Espinosa. So you spoke about the need to develop trust or redevelop trust in the Paris Agreement, its mechanism and critically between the states parties. Obviously, that is challenging in a global environment that currently includes Russia's aggression in Ukraine, the Sudan conflict, and the conflict in Palestine and Israel. So my question is, are you seeing a willingness to work together from states that are at odds over these conflicts, a la the International Space Station? Or are these conflicts materially challenging negotiations and eroding trust in the Paris Agreement?
Go ahead and respond.
Okay. Well, on one hand, I think we cannot be naive because, the international atmosphere is one of polarization, of tensions, of rivalry. That's what we experience. And I was, in September, for example, I was in New York for the UN General Assembly high-level week, and you could sense, the tensions and the mistrust. It is true. It is also true that difficulties and tension in one area can pollute or influence other spaces of negotiation. All this is true. But I have to say that perhaps, I'm keeping my expectations and hopes high because I saw how in the climate negotiations, some, positive energy, a sense of co-responsibility, a sense of not a zero-sum game negotiation mode happen. I saw it. And I think I can, perhaps cautiously say that perhaps the climate space is going to allow humanity to unite, to act responsibly, to exercise good diplomacy. And that's what I would like personally to see in Dubai in the very near future of COP28. It can be done. We saw during, very strained relationships between China and the United States, the two, leaders of climate negotiations of both countries coming together and agreeing on some very important commitments, such as the methane agreement, for example. It means that climate diplomacy can have the opposite effect, can have this, effect of trust building, of uniting, to defend the future of the planet and future generations. And hopefully this positive energy can then enter into the rooms of things that are being negotiated and discussed. I'm also hopeful that next year's Summit of the Future would be the space for good diplomacy, for goodwill, for negotiating and discussing the future of humanity and the future of the UN in a constructive manner. So it can be done. And I think that we have a collective responsibility. Children, women, indigenous peoples, the private sector, all these issues are too important to be left only to governments.
Thank you. Any more questions? The young lady at the front.
Hi. Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for everything that you said. This question is mostly based on what Ms. Espinosa said, but it's open to everyone. But you talked about rebuilding trust in the negotiation processes, and I was wondering how concretely you would think that would happen at COP28, and also how that would entail including and platforming more young voices into this process and more effectively, and how the COP28 can do better in that regard. Thank you.
Francisco, do you think this might be one for you in terms of the young voices, and how much trust there is in the process? I believe, you're very closely involved.
Ok, pues con mucho gusto respondo entonces esta pregunta. Bueno,
of course, I'll try and answer your question. No problem.
Por mi parte, quisiera también hacer énfasis incluso en la propia pregunta, ¿sí?
I would like to underline the following point. First of all, regarding what you said, young people and children in particular are very important, and they need to be included in all negotiations. But I think that we have to include children more than we include young people, because at the present time, young people are included. We also should have more cooperation between generations. We've already talked about that subject. It's also very important to focus on the transmission of knowledge to young people, to children. We need a lot of transmission of energy. We need more cooperation between generations. To answer your question more specifically, how can we include young people? I've talked about the question of funding. It is a fundamental element. We should need more funds, more funding, more financing in order to solve all of these issues. And also a request was made by UNICEF in that regard to include people under 18. To do more for people under 18. There are indeed civil society associations that speak on behalf of young people, so it would be important, at least for next year, for us to be directly involved in the future COPs. Children should be included in negotiations. So that there's a meeting every year in Bonn. There will be one in June 24, during which there is a dialogue between experts where we organize climate actions that take into account young people and children.
I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. The front there, straight ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. This question is to Mr. Ma Young. The panel mentioned that companies are not part of the negotiations on COP, but states are. So how do we create this relationship between companies and governments for a fair, accelerated, and sustainable transition, so our actions are aligned to the agreements?
Can I suggest that both Ms. Waysand from NG and Mr. Ma answer that really succinctly?
Sure, thank you so much. And I think this is a key question. We just as Maria said, we can't expect the governments to do all of this, to deliver on the Paris Agreement. We are way off track. There's no reliable path toward 1.5 degrees Celsius. In the meantime, so many companies, nearly 10,000 of them, have made their net zero carbon commitment, and financial institutions. But our assessment is that many of them have not really implement that, put that into action, put their words into action, particularly through their vast supply chain, which is the bulk of their carbon footprint. So how could we hold them accountable? Now we say building trust. I think one of the key issues to build trust in today's world with rising rivalry is transparency. We all need to go transparent. And China, which used to be considered a black hole of data, as I explained, it's no longer like that. So I think that created a new opportunity, emerging opportunity, for us to use a data-driven, a digital solution to green the globalized manufacturing, sourcing, and investment. But the key issue is to hold the leading companies accountable. They sit on the very top. They make all the rules. They can make huge influence through their supply chain.
Ms. Wei-Sand, you're sitting on top making the rules in the corporate sphere. So please give us your perspective quickly. Yes, I'm afraid we're almost out. We are out of time. But
so two main ideas. Indeed, we need collective action, and I think that's clearly what we have said throughout this panel. It's not one against the other. It's not one generation against the other. It's not private sector versus public sector. It's all together, and indeed in a multilateral way, because we all know that at the end of the day, the global warming will depend on everybody's action on the planet. So clearly something we need to do together. From a company standpoint, we are ready to put a lot of money into energy transition, and that's the way to make business models sustainable. So we are absolutely convinced that that's what we should do, and it's enshrined in our bylaws, not only because it's good for the planet and the people, but also because that's the way to have a sustainable performance. And I think we need to embark all companies around this simple idea. So first, companies have a huge role to play. Second, they will need the proper policies to be in place. We need clear signals from the states, clear supporting policies towards energy transition. And that's absolutely key, I think, for the success of energy transition. Last message, fully agree with the transparency. And I'm passionate about data. I mean, in our company, we have a trajectory with a net zero commitment by 2045 on all scopes, no exception. So indeed, that absolutely includes the supply chain. And that's something we need data for. We are monitoring this. We have not only financial budgets, we have CO2 budgets, and we are monitoring quarter after quarter where we are. But for this, we indeed need the quality of data to even improve further. So this kind of initiative is absolutely key.
We're ready to help. to work
Thank you so much to our panelists. If I may just wrap up the key notes, the key takeaways that came out of that for me were Mr. Ma on the power of transparency, Ms. Espinosa on the fact that we can't afford the luxury of pessimism, Francisco, your reference to eco-anxiety of children and adults, but also eco-hope, I thought was really incredibly powerful. And Ms. Wei-Sand, from NG's point of view, the request for clear signals from the state and the clearly very high ambition that you have really came across. Thank you so much to our panel, and thank you to the audience for listening.